Summer is here, but there is still a lot going on in the news world, including President Trump hitting North Korea for a visit that was short on planning, but big on theatrics. Now, whether you think it's good or bad, here's a new moment in history. Donald Trump becoming the first American president to set foot inside North Korea. Now, there was even confusion as these photographers that you see scrambled to try to get the right picture and get out of the way.
Guys, come on. Come on. Come on. Where are they going? Straight. They're going straight.
That kind of chaos is unusual in any diplomatic appearance because they're usually planned in a different way and with a lot more time. Now, that alone is not so significant, but Trump did proudly plan this on the fly, and also, and this is where it gets more important, was so intent on making this happen, on getting those pictures, that he basically gave up this in-person meeting without any clear concessions, at least any that have been reported as of this moment. The stage manager challenges were serious when White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham was also bruised after a scuffle with North Korean security guards who were reportedly trying to block U.S. reporters from getting close to that meeting between Trump and North Korea's leader. Another bit of drama there. Now, what's the policy here beyond these visuals? Well, the New York Times is already reporting that the Trump administration is considering a concession to North Korea that would allow a freeze in all nuclear production, but would keep the status quo. That means the stockpile of missiles stay, enshrining the status quo and thus tacitly accepting the North as a nuclear power. Now, that obviously is not the goal of U.S. policy, which is why Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, is denying those reports. I should mention, as an aside, he was not brought along to North Korea by the president. So what can we take from all of this, from these highlights of an unusual trip? Well, the president is already taking heat for putting pageantry above policy. Now, presidents in both parties avoided exactly this kind of visit precisely because it does risk giving North Korea something for nothing. Time on their turf, literally, the prestige of an American visit, and all the rest. Now, that doesn't mean that everything that is on the table or that's even being denied by the administration is completely unprecedented. Team Trump, again, they say there isn't necessarily going to be a surrender for a potential freeze that makes North Korea a nuclear-armed recognized power. But other administrations have also explored, at least in theory, similar proposals in unsuccessful efforts to find a solution for the North Korea problem.
This is a good deal for the United States. North Korea will freeze and then dismantle its nuclear program.
North Korea policy is not a place where precedent is even very encouraging. Past presidents didn't actually disarm North Korea, hence the debates today. But they certainly, in both parties, withheld the prestige of a presidential visit until this rogue nation was deemed to have improved its conduct. I'm joined now by Rick Stengel, who was Undersecretary of State in the Obama administration, former managing editor of Time as well, Jason Johnson from The Root, and Evelyn Farkas, a top Pentagon expert on Russia under President Obama. Good to have all of you. Evelyn, walk us through this, even for people who don't give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt on foreign policy. The administration is not alone in brainstorming and trying to be creative about some way to get out from under this. And yet at the same time, there were some things we saw here that don't seem to be traditional U.S. foreign policy, national security measures.
Right, Ari. I mean, I actually worked pretty heavily on North Korea policy when I worked for the Senate Armed Services Committee. And in 2008, I went to Yongbyon, to the nuclear facility, at a time when the Bush administration thought they had a deal with North Korea that involved getting to eliminating their nuclear program. It was a step-by-step approach where, you know, there was a lot of reciprocity. That's the same kind of proposal that they had under the Clinton administration, although that was more of a freeze. And it worked for a while until the North Koreans cheated and started a uranium program. So it's very hard to pin down the North Koreans. The problem with our current situation is that our president has eased up on the pressure, the sanctions. He's let the Russians and the Chinese and others provide, trade essentially under the table with the North Koreans. And he's also obviously extended this diplomatic hand, but he doesn't have a really good strategy, as far as we can tell, to actually get to an outcome.
And point blank, can you imagine President Obama or Bush going and doing a visit like we just saw, like we just showed on our screens here, without getting something in return?
No, not at all. And that's really the problem, Ari, because don't forget, we have actually frozen our major our major military exercises that we conduct with the South Koreans annually. We've frozen them. They're still frozen in deference to North Korean concerns. In exchange, they have stopped conducting any nuclear weapons tests. That's good. And they haven't conducted any intercontinental ballistic missile tests. That's also good. But again, no progress since President Trump met over a year ago with Kim Jong Un for the first time.
Rick?
Yes, I mean, Evelyn gave an excellent tour of the waterfront. And I mean, just to not put too fine a point on it, once upon a time, going to the DMZ with Kim Jong Un would have been the reward for successful talks that happened over months and years. Also, when you talk about the freezes that previous presidents did, remember that Clinton freeze was 20 years ago, before the North Koreans had what they have now, 20 or 30 or 40 nuclear missiles. I mean, and again, you know, to just try to punctuate it, the North Koreans feel that they have tricked Donald Trump, that in exchange for potentially freezing this or doing almost nothing, remember, they haven't destroyed a single missile, a single nuclear reactor, anything. In exchange for this photo op, they have basically gotten a kind of legitimacy in the world's eyes.
So walk us through this, because we'll keep this up on the screen. The frenzied videographers and photographers, you're speaking to something that they both share, that both of these leaders care a lot about the pictures that are beamed around the world.
Yes, but Kim Jong Un understands and has figured out that Donald Trump cares about that more than any single other thing. And by the way, the frenzy of the North Korean reporters is such that if they don't get the right picture, they're going to prison, unlike American reporters.
Well put and serious. Jason, the domestic politics on this are obviously fascinating. It is hard to rush from criticizing Barack Obama for a careful treaty with Iran all the way to co-signing all of this. But it can be done. Take a listen to Tucker Carlson.
You've got to be honest about what it means to lead a country. It means killing people. It's not necessarily a choice between, you know, the evil people and the great people. It's a choice most of the time between the bad people and the worst people. That's just kind of the nature of life, and certainly the nature of power.
Jason?
Well, congratulations for Tucker for making it so clear. Apparently, my doctorate in political science is a waste of time, because being a great leader is just about killing people. Who knew? Look, part of the issue here is this sort of reductionist and disingenuous way in which Donald Trump's behavior is interpreted. I don't think he has much of a plan. It's very clear that part of why he has these meetings with Putin and Kim Jong Un is not because he has some policy goals, because they're the only friends he seems to have left on the planet. And the concern that everybody should have is, look, initially the belligerence of this presidency actually led to conversations between North and South Korea because they were concerned. That's a good thing. But now he is just providing the sort of branding that North Korea needs, and he's not doing anything that either helps North and South Korea come together or makes it a less volatile part of the world. And that's the real problem with what's going on.
And do you think domestically, because the president has clearly made this something that he wants to tout, just like he's made the China trade talk and the tariff bluffs part of his re-election campaign, which we all know is happening. Do you think domestically this can be swallowed by the conservatives in America, who've traditionally had a lot more concern about what it means to cozy up to these kind of leaders abroad?
I mean, Ari, whether it's Putin, whether it's North Korea, you know, evangelical Christians, white conservatives in America have pretty much decided for the last 3 years that anything Donald Trump does is okay. Anything he plays on the piano is suddenly Beethoven. Anything that he does policy-wise is certainly, you know, he's the next, Churchill or something. It doesn't really matter what's going to happen domestically. What does happen, though, we saw this from Joe Biden, Democrats will attack Donald Trump not just on having these meetings for symbolic purposes, but they'll attack him on getting nothing done. That the deal maker continues to have these meetings and leaves the poker table naked. He has nothing to show for all these meetings with North Korea, and that's where it becomes a domestic issue that Democrats can really work from.
Well, but if he leaves the poker table naked, but the entire court acts like the emperor is still wearing clothes, then is he really naked?
we don't know. Sarah Huckabee Sanders says that she sees nothing but clothing. That's what her last words.
Evelyn, widening out to the context, of course, anytime the president deals with Putin, it gets extra attention. He made a choice to form a sort of rhetorical common cause with Putin about, quote unquote, getting rid of journalists, which comes after, what Rick was just reminding us about the lack of a free press in North Korea, the abuse that these governments deploy. And that was a comment that I think it's fair to say, if any president, Obama or Bush, said that, I think there would have been a huge and long story in this world. We covered it here on The Beat, but it didn't necessarily get the outrage one would expect or want in the United States. Put it in that wider context with Putin, with the Saudis, with everything else on this trip.
Yeah, no, I mean, Ari, it's outrageous. First of all, one of the most dangerous places to be a journalist in the world today is in Russia, in the Russian Federation, because there's some free press there, but if you cross the line too many times, especially investigative journalists, you are likely to end up dead. And that goes for whether you're in Russia or whether you go elsewhere, but you've been covering Russia unfavorably or the government unfavorably.
Right, the international
so it's
poisoning.
Outrageous,
yeah.
Right, that the president says this. And then, of course, we know very well what the Saudis do. I mean, they assassinate people, and the brutal assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a resident of Virginia in the United States, who should have been deemed a lot more protection, not to mention, of course, outrage coming from the White House than he got. So, I mean, the president just seems to gloss over all this. And unfortunately, the American people have gotten used to it. But it's appalling. I mean, we should not be sitting quietly and accepting the president nodding while he sits with these people who have blood on their hands.
Yeah. Rick, as a chief diplomat for Barack Obama, particularly looking at public persuasion and how we're treated in the world, I can only imagine the preparations, the briefings, the research that you all did, which goes up in a line all the way up to the chief executive. Contrast that, if you will, and I admit this is somewhat low-hanging fruit, but contrast that to the way the president doesn't seem to grasp all of the vocabulary that is put towards him when he's in these international appearances. Take a look.
Yeah.
His comments to the Financial Times right before arriving here was that Western-style liberalism is obsolete.
If you look at what's happening in Los Angeles, where it's so sad to look, and what's happening in San Francisco and a couple of other cities, which are run by an extraordinary group of liberal people, I don't know what they're thinking.
Ari, appear to understand the question, I guess.
I don't mind that he doesn't know who John Locke is or John Stuart Mill, who are great beacons of liberalism. But what's sad is that he doesn't understand that we are the product of Western liberalism, that the post-Cold War order of freedom and democracy and globalization was something that we created and we controlled and reigned over.
You're coming in really highbrow. I was coming in a little more lowbrow, I admit, the question was about the international concept of Western liberalism, and he appeared to only understand it as West Coast political progressivism.
I'll go low now, which is that I actually
Michelle's not here. I know you worked in that administration.
His brain basically froze in the 70s and 80s, and he grew up in the 60s where there was this idea of liberals versus conservatives, and the liberals were the long hairs who were protesting against Vietnam, and he was against it. He's a kid from military school. He's a kid who had nothing but disdain for that, and which his father did too. Neither he nor his father ever served. So he looks at everything through that scrim. Yes, that highfalutin idea of what happened with the Enlightenment and liberalism and Western democracy is not something he would understand. But he understands it only in a very, very basic way. And because he has a kind of authoritarian personality, that's the scrim through which he sees this.
Yeah, and Evelyn, what do you think? I mean, him not getting it is more concerning if you think that he's also faking it on bigger issues.
Well, I think the problem, Ari, so I'm a political scientist, and I'm going to try to find the medium spot here.
Sure.
Liberal democracy is about a democracy that's more than just voting, right? Because Russia's technically a democracy, they vote. But they don't have the other things that make a democracy really real, right? And that's what we mean when we say liberal democracy. It's a real democracy, okay? And then Donald Trump is talking about liberalism in the American context, which is like big government and maybe a separate social agenda, right? He's confusing these two things, but they actually matter. Because when you're on the international stage, you're fighting against Vladimir Putin and all the dictators around the world to protect liberal democracy, to protect the kind of democracies we and the Europeans and the Japanese and the Israelis and all of our allies and partners have. That matters. And so he shouldn't be bringing up the domestic American context, but maybe he doesn't know better. He should.
And he not only doesn't know what liberal democracy is, he doesn't know what illiberal democracy is, and that's Evelyn's point. That's what we are protesting against, we are leading against around the world. Illiberal democracy are countries like Russia, which have elections, but have nothing that's democratic about them besides that.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.